When a unique orphan with a strange power befriends a boy with a loving family, he reveals his biggest secret, hoping to be accepted as one of their own. Soon, a tragic accident makes his dreams come true, but far from what he imagined. One night in a carnival, a man asks to buy cotton candy from a stall. Despite saying he's already closing, the puzzled vendor heeds the request of the pleading man, who watches him spin the sugar confection in awe. After eating the cotton candy, the young man sneaks inside an orphanage and disrobes, revealing his children's pajamas, and quietly returns to bed, transforming into a boy named Simon. Sometime later, the orphanage's director, Madame Gautran, greets a driver saying the children are ready for their trip to town. While the orphans fool around the house, Simon smoothens his shirt, hoping to be adopted soon. However, Kevin, a bully, calls Simon ugly, so the educator scolds him. Later that day, the educator watches over the children at the town's festival as they hurriedly board a docked ship. Parting from the others, Simon climbs to the engine room and hides. Unexpectedly, a girl named Madeline stares at him from the other side when her brother, Thomas, enters from a hatch, sneaking cake and a bottle of wine for themselves. Thomas sees Simon looking at them, so he invites him over to share their food. After drinking some wine, Simon reveals he was left as a baby at the orphanage. As sympathy for the orphan's unfortunate life, Thomas claims he's allergic to potatoes and can't eat fries. Much later, Simon steals a plate of bread and hides underneath the table to eat with his new friends. Then the trio hears the siblings' parents looking for them. Suddenly, strong hands grab Madeline from their hiding spot, followed by Thomas, who tries to escape. Despondently, Simon watches his friends laugh with their father, Jacques, and mother, Agnès Durand, longing for a family himself. Days after, Madame Gautran calls Simon, informing him that Jacques' son wants to invite him over the weekend to their house. Thrilled, the orphan accepts the invitation and happily returns to his room. When the weekend arrives, Jacques fetches Simon and drives him to their house, where Thomas welcomes him eagerly. Then, the delighted orphan helps prepare the table and joins the family dinner. Later that night, Simon peeks through Madeline's door, watching Agnès help her daughter wear her nasal cannula to help her breathe. Seeing the lovely sight, the lonely orphan quietly retreats to Thomas' room. The boy eagerly shows Simon his astronaut books, but the loving parents put them both to sleep. But the rowdy pair turns on their flashlights in the dark to continue their fun. The following day, Jacques enters the dining room with Thomas's birthday cake, so the celebrant immediately blows out the candles. Laughingly, Simon and Madeleine blow it too, while Jacques tries lighting it again. After playing charades, the boys engage Jacques in a pillow fight, so Madeleine gives Simon the heaviest pillow, helping him attack her father. Later that night, Thomas sneaks a pocket knife into the fort they built in his room. He asks Simon if he wants to be their blood brother for life, saying they must mix their blood and reveal each other's biggest secret. Adamant to be part of a family, Simon affirms. Then, Thomas slashes his palm and draws blood on a glass ashtray, while Madeleine and Simon follow suit. After completing the pact and covering their wounds with a bandage, Thomas shares his secret, revealing he saw his mother bare. Then, Madeleine despondently shares that she doesn't have friends, but her brother protests, saying it's obvious. Pressed to reveal an untold truth, Madeleine says she won't live for more than 20 years, according to her parents. As the boys stare at her silently, she prompts Simon to reveal his secret. Reluctantly, Simon makes his friends swear to continue their brotherhood despite a strange secret. Then, Simon magically changes his appearance to another boy before turning back, leaving the siblings in shock. Upon Thomas's request, Simon changes into another boy's appearance and reverts, clarifying that he can only copy someone's looks if he has touched them. He then shows that his wound has disappeared after changing, wondering if he's immortal, as Thomas suggests. Nevertheless, Madeleine says Simon must retain his scar to prove they're blood brothers. After amusing his friends with his power, the trio returns to their beds. Deeper into the night, Simon hears heaving breaths from Madeleine's room. When he enters, he finds the girl catching her breath and calming down. Curious about her pain, Simon accepts Madeleine's hand and changes into her. Suddenly, he feels the same aching in his chest and struggles for air. Madeleine tells him to wait patiently until it passes, so Simon returns to himself, understanding their shared pain. The following day, Madeleine brings Simon a pink raincoat her mother bought him. As they sit in awkward silence, the girl suddenly kisses him on the cheek. Then Thomas enters, annoyed by their matching raincoat's color. As the two boys venture into the woods, Thomas gives Simon his pocket knife so he can dig and escape from the orphanage. After setting a branch on a path to mark their starting point, Thomas eagerly starts the race. Due to small body, Simon falls behind, so he changes into someone athletic and runs past Thomas. As the pair runs further, Thomas calls Simon to stop but accidentally slips and falls into a deep ravine. When Simon hears his friend scream, he searches and calls out for him, stumbling upon the cliff. That night, Jacques pursues the woods with a search party for the two boys. When Simon hears the group calling out their names, he realizes they're mostly searching for Thomas. Meanwhile, Agnieszka comforts her daughter at home, equally worried for the missing boys. As Simon witnesses the disheartened family outside the window, he nervously decides to return as Thomas, renewing his disappeared blood-packed wound. Shortly, Agnieszka opens the door to Thomas, who reluctantly returns her unfamiliar embrace. Not long after, Madeleine watches her supposed brother being questioned by the police. The fake Thomas narrates the incident, worrying Madame Gautran, who asks where Simone was last seen. Worried they might find Thomas's body, Simone says they got lost, blaming himself for his friend's disappearance, so they let him rest. Later that night, Simone enters his new room and Madeleine follows him. Suspiciously, the girl asks if he's really Thomas and checks his packed wound, making her believe Simone is gone. Soon after an unfortunate search, the Durants and the orphanage workers gather around Simone's empty grave, as Madeleine weeps for her lost childhood love. Years later, Dr. Badet advises a much older Madeleine on what not to eat, but she refuses to listen. The worried doctor says she must be careful with her health since there's a long list of patients before she can have a heart transplant. Frustrated by her unwavering condition, Madeleine exits the hospital tearfully. While Jacques cleans his vehicle outside his mirror shop, a young woman enters to claim her order, asking for Thomas specifically. When a much older Thomas hands the customer her package, she then asks about his plans on vacation, but the timid young man insists he'll remain working. On Thomas's birthday, the Durant family and friends gather as the celebrant unwraps his gifts. Then, Jacques hands his son his gift, containing a mirror plaque for the shop with both of their names, revealing he's handing over the shop to him. Outside, Thomas looks at the scar on his palm, despondently pondering the shop left for the real Thomas. Suddenly, Madeleine arrives with her boyfriend, who drives her on his motorbike. Seeing her lonely brother, Madeleine approaches him, learning their father has already revealed his plan. When the young man claims he doesn't know what he wants, Madeleine hugs him in sympathy. That evening, Jacques calls their guests to make fun of the celebrants' pictures as a family tradition. As the proud parents tell stories behind the scanned photographs on a slideshow, the young Simone's picture flashes on the screen, catching them all off guard. Later that night, Thomas stares at his reflection in his room and changes into his original face as a grown-up Simone for the first time. While walking in town, Thomas sees a telescope displayed in a store, so he eagerly enters the shop to check it out. However, he stops short when he finds the blonde woman inside. Hesitant to talk to her, Simone shifts into his own skin and purchases the telescope without the woman's attention. Afterwards, Simone eagerly buys a plate of fries, missing the dish's taste since he has been impersonating a man allergic to potatoes. Unexpectedly, the young man sees Madeleine staring at him through the window, recognizing his face. So, Simone nervously looks away, hoping she doesn't realize who he is. As Simone returns home as Thomas, he hurriedly changes his shirt just as Madeleine knocks on his room. The young woman relentlessly insists that her childhood friend is still alive and shows Thomas a stolen picture of Simone at the cafe on her phone. Unable to look at his photo, the fake Thomas refutes Madeleine's claims, saying Simone is dead. Unaware that she's talking to the real Simone, Madeleine walks out in frustration. The following day, Simone sees a missing people's poster with his picture from Madeleine, who hands passersby similar flyers. Thinking of a way to stop Madeleine, Simone purchases new clothes as he reverts to his original form. Deliberately, Simone enters the cafe where he was seen, finding Madeleine inside, secretly waiting for him. After gaining the woman's attention, Simone takes a seat. As expected, Madeleine approaches and asks if he's Simone. However, Simone calmly denies it, but the young woman disbelieves him, so he claims her wariness saddens him. Taken aback, Madeleine apologizes and turns away. Suddenly, she has trouble breathing, so Simone worriedly leads her outside for air. As Madeleine calms down, she asks for the young man's name, so Simone claims he's called Michel. Then, the waitress hands Michel's fries and offers Madeleine some help, which she refuses. Michel's indifference to Madeleine's problem irks her, so he claims he's merely disinterested as he eats his fries. While staring at Madeleine's face, Michel calls her beautiful. Amidst the awkward silence, Madeleine receives a text from her parents. Simultaneously, Michel gets one too and texts a quick reply. Before the woman leaves, she writes her number on the paper plate, implying she's interested as well. At dinner, Thomas watches Madeleine expecting a text from Michel, unaware she's in the same room as him. To hide his identity, Thomas buys another phone for Michelle's use. Soon, the two meet for a date by the beach, where Madeleine shows him her secret hideout in a nearby cavern. Enamored by the beautiful woman, Michelle kisses her, which Madeleine passionately reciprocates. On their second date, Madeleine leads Michelle to their house through the woods and into her room. Noticing her lover is unusually silent because of her intentions, Madeleine reveals her days are numbered and kisses him, prompting an intimate afternoon. Afterward, Michelle hears the Durants arrive, so he hurriedly dresses up to leave, but Madeleine insists on introducing him. Downstairs, Jacques and Agnes greets Michelle, unaware he's the same person they have lived with for the past years. However, the young man locks eyes with Jacques, who seems to recognize his face. One night, while lying in the woods around a bonfire, Madeleine confesses to Thomas that she's madly in love with Michelle. Emotionally, she admits to wanting a long life beyond her illness, while Thomas stares at her emotionally. Then, Madeleine realizes Thomas is looking at her the same way Michelle does, making her get up and return to bed. The following day, Madeleine rummages through her brother's stuff, looking for the same shirt Michelle is wearing on the missing poster. At the cafe, Michelle calls and waits for Madeleine, who suspiciously watches him from afar. When she doesn't show up, Michelle leaves to retrieve Thomas's clothes from a backpack he's hiding in the woods. Unbeknownst to Simone, Madeleine witnesses how he changed from Michelle to Thomas, confirming her worst fear. Shortly after, Madeleine confronts Thomas in his room, revealing she knows his secret, and calls him Simone. Distraught, Simone stops her outburst and transforms into his original self, leaving Madeleine wailing in agony. When the aggrieved woman recovers, she asks about her real brother's whereabouts. As Simone leads Madeleine into the deep ravine where Thomas died, she tells him to reveal the truth to her parents. However, Simone offers that he'll run away instead of making Jacques and Agnes suffer from his deceit. Enraged, Madeleine calls him a coward, saying her parents don't care about him and swears she'll find another way to reveal his power. Tearfully, Simone professes his love for Madeleine as she walks away. Upon Madeleine's request, the police, led by Commissioner Leroy, enclose the ravine to retrieve the dead boy's remains. Afterward, the officer questions Thomas in her office, showing him a picture of the raincoat and asking about Simone. Since the boy's remains were recovered, the urn is placed inside Simone's once empty grave. Knowing it's her brother inside, Madeleine quietly weeps and glares at Thomas, who excuses himself and rushes home. Thinking he has no choice but to escape, Thomas gathers his stuff and is about to leave when the Durants return. Thomas claims he's suffocated at home, so Jacques and Agnes worriedly try to talk to him. Suddenly, Madeleine points a shotgun at Thomas and shoots the ceiling to warn Jacques of her tenacity. Distressed, she threatens Thomas to reveal his true self. But when the young man takes a step, Madeleine immediately shoots him in the stomach, so Jacques snatches the shotgun from his daughter. While Agnes calls for an ambulance, Madeleine shouts at Thomas to transform and save himself from the fatal wound. Tormented, Thomas claims that he's sad and tells the Durants that he loves them as he returns as Simone. As Jacques and Agnes step away from the strange man in shock, Madeleine explains Simone replaced Thomas, whom they buried earlier. When Simone is about to leave, Jacques accuses him of pushing his son. Affronted, Simone denies and calls him father, so Jacques throws him in rage. Eventually, Jacques weepingly strangles Simone outside as the police arrive. To escape, Simone changes into Thomas, shocking Jacques and the onlookers as he seizes the opportunity. Commissioner Leroy tries to stop the young man, but he immediately drives away with the police car while Madeleine falls in pain. Shortly, the police intercept Simone in town, so he escapes on foot. When they reach a crowd, Leroy sees a discarded bloody shirt on the ground, implying the escapee has transformed into another face. A month later, Madeleine looks back at a police officer observing them from afar, assuming Simone follows them around. Suddenly, Madeleine sees an old man staring at her in sorrow. Recognizing that he's Simone, she approaches him, but Agnes calls her back. As she returns to her mother, Madeleine drops her cane and runs towards her lover in his original body, whom she kisses longingly, professing her love no matter who he is. Cautious of the police watching them, Madeleine tells Simone to take her as they run away. However, Madeleine falls behind and drops to the ground because of her worsening condition. As Agnes catches up, Simone fails to carry Madeleine with his body, so he transforms into Jacques before the crowd and runs to the car. Arriving at the hospital, Dr. Badet hurriedly takes Madeleine to the emergency room. Not long after, Commissioner Leroy's troop swarms the building to look for Simone, asking to check everyone's identity individually. While Simone waits for an update, the real Jacques arrives, informing Agnes about the police. Simultaneously, the young man changes into an old man, so Agnes tells her husband Simon helped her, insisting they must prioritize Madeleine. When Dr. Bidet returns, he informs the Durants that Madeleine needs immediate surgery, but she's still listed for transplant. Unfortunately, Jacques' heart is unfit for his daughter, so the doctor advises them to bid their goodbyes while Simone silently sheds tears. Shortly, Simone sees officers approaching, so he leaves and takes a physician's face. Then he steals some medication in the storage room and wears a coat. When Officer Dennis stops Simone to check his identity, the real physician sees him, so he runs to escape. While Dennis searches for Simone, Commissioner Leroy appears, demanding the stamp. Suspicious of the woman, Dennis radios the real Leroy, realizing in front of him is Simone. However, the convict knocks the officer unconscious, transforms into Dennis, and steals his stuff. Now wearing Leroy's face, Simone approaches the guards outside Madeleine's room, granting her entry. She informs Jacques and Agnes that all exits are secured, implying he can't escape, asking for a moment alone with Madeleine. Realizing that she's Simone, Agnes and Jacques exit the room, allowing him to reunite with their dying daughter. Shortly, the guards stand in shock before the real Leroy. When the officer barges into the room, she sees Simone lifeless while holding Madeleine on the bed. After realizing that Simone killed himself with a substance, Leroy finds a note on his hand, asking them to save Madeleine. To heed his final request, Simone and Madeleine's body is prepared for a heart transplant. Soon after, the Durants grieve at the cemetery where they rightfully place the urns of the two boys under their respective names, officially naming Simone Durant. As the media surround the controversial family, Madeleine runs away, living her second life with her lover's heart.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.